You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Good morning and welcome to today's episode. We are honored to be joined by a remarkable individual whose life's journey reads like a roadmap through America's defining moments of the 21st century. Ryan McDermott is a man who has witnessed history from the front lines, both literally and figuratively. A West Point graduate and decorated U.S. Army veteran, Ryan led troops into battle during the 2003 invasion of Iraq with the 3rd Infantry Division, earning the Bronze Star Medal, Ranger Tab, and Combat Infantry Badge for his service. When he left the military in 2006, Ryan found himself on another battlefield, Wall Street, working with the Lehman Brothers until its historic collapse during the 2008 financial crisis. He experienced firsthand the economic earthquake that reshaped America. His journey then took him to the corridors of power as a senior Pentagon official specializing in national security policy, finance, and government relations. Now, today, Ryan serves as an executive in the aerospace and defense industry, bringing his unique perspective from military service, financial markets, and government all to the private sector. In his powerful memoir, Downriver, Memoir of a Warrior Poet, Ryan explores the personal cost of these professional journeys, from losing his childhood home to foreclosure to confronting the unseen scars of war, to rebuilding his identity and redefining what the American dream means in today's uncertain world. Now, a warm welcome to you wherever you are listening from. We do appreciate you being here today. Please consider sharing this with 3 of your friends. I know that many are going to enjoy this conversation. So a big thanks to those of you that have given us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player. And of course, thanks to those who've ventured over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast and bought us a few of those delicious virtual cups of coffee this week and last. And you might also find us on goodpods.com, where we're ranked in the top 100 of the Society and Culture segment of podcasts. And thank you to those of you at goodpods.com today. Now, Ryan, thank you for joining me for 5 a.m. podcast, and thanks for getting into an extraordinary story.
Michael, thanks for having me on this morning.
It's great to have you here. I do want to ask, we'll start out about your memoir, Downriver, and it evokes movement through challenging waters. What does this metaphor represent in your life's journey, and why did you choose to identify as the warrior poet?
Well, first, I think address the sort of metaphor you allude to, the river. I don't want to sort of, I think the Garth Brooks song, "A Dream is like a river," river. I think life is like a river and so there's a metaphor there where, you got calm waters down the stream, but you don't see them necessarily in the rapids here or vice versa. And so the metaphor of life for me, I like the sort of the river is sort of that. And the use of the term downriver refers to a specific poem I eventually wrote about really the love story between myself and my then estranged wife is reflecting on the past, looking sort of back, upriver, downriver, whatever you want to call it. Think reliving the past to a degree to come to some understanding of today, where I was in that present moment, and looking forward, because I believe, one of the key messages of Downriver, of that metaphor, is that you've kind of got to understand the nature of life, that you can't predict the future. And so that's how that ties forward.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, but you mentioned the warrior poet, and
Yes.
I wanted to get that as well. And so the term warrior poet, I first heard it watching the movie Braveheart, I think in the mid 90s, Mel Gibson movie. Sort of the term warrior poet was introduced, and it kind of evokes this sort of, the warrior is someone who is sort of adheres to certain values, but the warrior poet is someone who seeks broader meaning in that fight. What are we fighting for? What is that? And and the terminology I use is that it also is like, how does the warrior translate traumatic experiences into growth, either through some sort of artistic expression?
Right. And there's also too the John Lovell, the warrior poet way, a guide to living free and dying well. And he said, the worst enemy we face in life is always ourselves. You are the biggest obstacle between where you are now and the courageous life you are capable of living. And I wanted to bring that up because that's kind of the essence of what we do here at 5 a.m. podcast, is talking about the potential of life, where we're at, the obstacles. Some people shy away from the obstacles. I know in the scripture it actually says God takes no pleasure in those that turn away, look and turn away. So we think of Eve and other people, or not Eve, sorry, Lot's wife in the scriptures of that. And I bring up those ideas, and I wanted to share that quote because I would like to know, was there some time, whether it was preparing for '03 in those attacks or other areas, where you had that decision, do I keep my hands on the plow and keep going forward, or do I choose a different path?
That is a thought provoking question. I think for much of my life, I sort of had this vision that, a lot of this explained in the book, that I pursued a path the way I did because I wanted to have a family, and that, for me, military service was a path towards the American dream, a down payment. I came from a working class family, and so I viewed military service as a sort of pathway to that. Going to war, obviously, sort of there's a spiritual journey. I actually talk a little bit about this, and sort of when I was at West Point, wrestling with the idea of, was I capable of taking another person's life? Why? What rationale? And those are questions, and it certainly shaped my perspective about, is this the right path for me? I think along the path, what kept me on a certain path is I really gravitated towards the people who were with me. There's a person in there named Travis Patrick, when he was a captain, who died in Iraq in 2006. Incredible human being, incredible person. And when we met in the infantry officer basic course, I just was gravitated towards his spirit. And so there's some other, we get further in the book, there's definitely a sort of slippery slope of saying, hey, I'm in a point where maybe I'm not, maybe this is a point where I need to think about, is this the right path?
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. I get that. Yeah, it is those moments as we're developing the foundation for our lives that we have to answer some tough questions. And so I wanted to ask you then a little bit more about West Point. Oftentimes, West Point graduates might follow a predictable career path, and perhaps you might feel that your path to date hasn't been conventional. What drove you to make these diverse transitions from military service to Wall Street and then to the Pentagon?
Well, others would say that maybe it is a traditional path.
Okay.
West
Okay.
Point. It's interesting because, thinking through those decisions, I kind of go through them in the book, and why I made the decision to leave the Army. Leaving the Army in 2006 was something that was a very difficult decision. It's something I later on had guilt. I had a guilt. It's sort of it may seem contradictory. I'm trying to do the right thing for my family, because we had my son. We had our second on the way when the decision had to be made whether or not to stay in or leave the military. But that ultimately factored in, is the sort of impact of deployments and going to war on on my family.
Yeah.
So the decision to go to Wall Street was more of a financial one. So I get to business school. What is I had to take out student loans, and that was before the post 9/11 GI Bill had been processed. So I ended up I basically sometimes, so a lot of my decisions, and this is something I wrestle with in the book, is that the financial decisions ultimately drove decision making that wasn't necessarily the best for my family.
Wow. Yeah, and we all have to cross that bridge, so to speak. And speaking of bridge, talk about a segue. Your book, alludes in metaphors the river, and I'm sure that that pivotal moment in your military career in '03 with that invasion of Iraq, and um, I kind of want to get into this battle of that bridge and how bridges are so critical to militaries and to defense. And like those who are defending do not want, they'd love to keep the bridge, but they don't want to have the bridge used by the enemy. And so I just wanted to ask you about the emotions and the training that went into being where you felt confident to lead that platoon of the 3rd Infantry Division. What were some of those mental and physical preparations that you went through at that time?
Well, 4 years of West Point did a lot to prepare me to become a leader. The infantry officer basic course, Ranger School, which I go into great detail about, sort of under, sort of foundational being able to lead a unit, and then the training. Once I got to my unit, there was a lot of training. I had been a platoon leader for, I took the platoon over the platoon literally right after 9/11. 9/11, I was the day I signed into my unit, and I was called back off of leave. And hey, you're not going to have any sort of transition leave. You're going to take your charge of your unit. And so I had like a year and a half of time. You can do the math of what it was, but
Yeah,
we did a lot of preparation, a lot of training, and that and your soldiers get a chance to know you. You understand their capabilities, and my style was really just to try to empower the people I trusted, and it was less about me,
right.
frankly speaking, and I had an amazing leadership team above me. Colonel Rockmar Cone, my Captain Todd Kelly, who was my commander, he's now colonel. But the preparation, yeah, and you kind of allude to this. The bridge is a kind of like the culminating event. It's the big action event.
Yeah.
Probably the climax of the book is when we took the bridge over the Euphrates River. That was where the entire 3rd Infantry Division and Army crossed the Euphrates. They had sort of faked crossing other sites, but that one was in my platoon, and it just ended up being the first to go across.
Wow. Well, that's powerful. Well, we know Rangers lead the way. That's what I've heard. And so, in thinking of even that phrase, Rangers lead the way, can you talk about after leaving the military service and still having that mindset? How did you adapt that Rangers lead the way to working on Wall Street and later at the Pentagon?
Well, there's some interesting, there's some things in this that I want to kind of tease out. I think it's
Okay.
implied. That mindset really played well in the infantry culture. It is a very direct type of communication when you go to the Ranger School. I was Ranger tabbed. I did not serve in a Ranger
Okay.
unit, so you know
Gotcha.
but we were at the tip of the spear. Like my unit was a tip of spear going in Iraq. I think the mindset was I thought I could take on any challenge on my own. And when you take on a career like going into Wall Street, there's implications for your family, and just like the military. But once in the military, there's a great community that sort of helps the families and supports the families. You go in the commercial corporate world, there's not that same sort of structure. So when I went to work on Wall Street, it was kind of a difficult. The summer before, like '07 was fine. '08, I show up full time.
Yeah.
you know it's out of your control. um we And so working those long hours was is quite a grind. But I think overall, one thing I want to hit, Michael, was that
Yes.
the mindset, I think, is a little bit contradictory to what is good for mental health, because the Ranger sort of infantry mindset is never quit. And that's not something that, it almost sort of evokes a mentality of, I'm not going to seek help. And that was something as I think one of the things that, if I was talking to younger, anybody, actually, it doesn't matter if you're
Right.
military or what, is
Yeah.
it's not a sign of weakness to seek help. You
Hmm.
know, it is, and that can be like on a work assignment or whatever. But if you feel like you're drowning, I think that is the Ranger mindset is kind of instilled in me in a way of like, I didn't want to seek help, but I think it's important that, and that was one of the things dealing with PTSD, why it's a little bit of a challenge, even more of a challenge, I think, for the military, is it's sort of, it had at least had been ingrained that, it's almost in the training, hey, never quit. But well, wait, maybe asking for help is okay.
Right. Well, so you've got that heavy load And so, just to our listeners, we've got that comment section. And I know that Ryan and I would both love to hear maybe your experience of a time where you had the option to turn or pursue what you were going through. And there's a reference in the Bible of King David seeking the prophets, and his whole family had been captured in a battle while they were away, taking care of business. And he sought the word of the Lord through the prophet, and the word of the Lord was pursue, overtake, and recover all. And perhaps you've had a moment in your life where you've wondered, should I keep going forward? Should I pursue, overtake, and recover all? But certainly, Ryan, like you're talking about, that lesson of asking for help and knowing that we have a certain capacity. I wanted to ask you if there was maybe another profound leadership lesson that you took away from the bridge over the Euphrates experience.
Let me see here. That's a good question. I have to think about it. I mean, one of the lessons is that that mission was planned well in advance. Like, it had been planned weeks before we even crossed the border. I knew that my platoon would be, and it's weird how, because a lot of things happened up until then, and then it was like, oh, now this is finally happening, right? The sort of satellites and all that other stuff. So I think one of the lessons I took from that is that you can plan, but then you also have to have the ability to build in some flexibility so you're ready. The point of planning is to build the sort of mindset of, like, here's where the opportunities are going to be and how we're going to capitalize on those, right? And there's got
Yeah.
to be adaptability. And so there's a lot that I kind of knew that going in, but then it's just, there's decision, like being very decisive is important, because just to give you the war story behind this. So we get to the bridge, and I kind of expected there would be some obstacles. The Iraqis blew up the one span of the bridge. So there's two spans structurally. They
Okay.
blew up one side. We couldn't see it on our side, but it was because on the far side. So now I'd planned to assault across both sides. Now I had to adjust my plan to one side. Well, the Iraqis then they tried to send some civilian trucks and to block, and there were literally a truck in the way of our path there. And so as we were, and then they had wired the demolitions on the bridge, and we had to have engineers go and clear underneath the bridge. And I waited and waited, and I will tell you, Michael, you're talking a little about spiritual and that part.
Yeah.
That spiritual preparation was probably just as much as important as anything else, because when it comes to making that decision at that point in time, and saying silent prayers in my turret, not knowing if I'm worthy of salvation at that moment, but just praying to God that I might get through that and lead
Yeah.
my soldiers through that so they could see their loved ones.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's a moment of decision when it's like, well, it's time to go. And, there can't be any uncertainty. There's got to be, sort of mentally that mental focus, but also a spiritual focus that, hey, this, we're going to do this.
And I know that you had a note of praise from General Petraeus on your memoir, and I believe it was about understanding the burden of leadership in combat. And how did you prepare your men for this?
Well, one of the ways we prepare, well, there's a lot of preparation and training. So you do battle drills, you do lots of rock drills, sort of here's where everyone's going to go. And there's a lot of training, like months and months of training. And so everyone's very comfortable with it. That's about all you can do. And try to have a genuine relationship with them so they know that you care about them. Because a leader's job in combat is literally can decide somebody lives or dies. And
Yeah.
the leader, you don't want to put your people at risk unnecessarily.
Yes. And I was thinking, was there that confidence building in your men, or that kind of that mindset preparation that you interacted with your men on?
Well, there's a lot of bonding in the field. And, I think that, back then we had a lot of confidence. I felt ultimate confidence that I was outside. This is being very candid. I was probably more concerned about friendly fire accidentally, just
Okay.
because our capabilities were so outmatching in many
Right.
regards. And if
Yeah.
you're on the offensive, you have there's a lot better, and this kind of there's a little I sort of foreshadow the insurgency in my narrative. One of the last missions was we had to drive up and down a road to make sure that IEDs weren't in place. And that was a much more treacherous battlefield because you don't have the sort of insight of when and where the attack's going to happen. We were on the offensive going over the bridge, we had the intel, we had the momentum. And so I think a lot of that confidence comes from, from the soldiers. It's in the command
Right.
all the way up the command team, and through all the training, there's a lot of opportunity for learning and direct feedback on what can be improved.
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. There again, a very teachable moment of asking for help and knowing how the whole structure works together. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask you just about the Lehman Brothers experience and that collapse. A fun fact, I was in an episode of Fargo a few years ago where I was background on a trading floor in Lehman Brothers office when all of this stuff was going, and our main character was off. Well, he wasn't on set at that time, but he's got that shot where he's like hands over his head sitting at the desk, something like that. That was a while ago. But when I was thinking and researching this, I was remembering back to being an extra on Fargo in this experience, probably not like what you were experiencing at all, but can you draw some parallels between that military and financial experience, and what similarities did you observe between that battlefield chaos and maybe the chaos that was happening at Lehman Brothers?
Well, that's a great question. And how I draw this out is both situations were stressful for me in a personal way, but for different reasons. And ironically, a war was probably less of a, sort of
Yeah.
strain on me because there was a community of support. One of the things with Lehman Brothers, with Lehman Brothers is interesting because it's all hindsight is 2020.
Yes.
In August, when we showed up, it looked like maybe Lehman, we were wondering if it would be bailed out. It was, to be frank, and because we saw it as a systemic issue, and other banks were weak and so forth. So there's a commonality of that, and the way one of the ways I tie the story from the Iraq War to the Lehman Brothers experience is the service and sacrifice of Captain Travis Patriquin. And I didn't realize that he had died in 2006. So I've only realized he died in the sort of early fall, late summer of 2008. And when I learned that he died, I had immense guilt because I had stopped following the casualty list, and it affected me in a way because I felt there was a disconnection between the civilian world I found myself in and the world I had just experienced that was fighting a war overseas. So that's sort of the common thread there. There is a sort of story arc that crosses over, but very stressful. And the lesson is that there's a lot of things you can. Good decision, I think, from a career perspective in 2007. Hey, this is a great firm. 2008, everything, the tide had turned on the markets, and there's some scenes in there. I'll save it, but it was
Yes.
a stressful situation, to say the
I
least.
can imagine. I can imagine. And you made it through. You persevered. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, let's see. I have a Facebook page.
Okay.
Downriver, Memoir of a Warrior Poet. I think that's probably the best way to follow that page, and they can, if somebody wants to reach out through there, they can do that. That's probably the social media that I'm monitoring
Okay.
the closest.
Great. And so that's where they can find your book as well?
They can find that there's certainly links on that page.
Okay.
On Downriver, Memoir of a Warrior Poet on the Facebook page.
Right.
They can also find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, and so
Okay.
forth.
That's great. So getting back then to our conversation, you've experienced significant professional success alongside personal struggles. Looking back, what do you consider maybe your greatest achievement, and then what remains unfinished in your journey?
Well, career stuff, I would put secondary. My greatest achievement right now is, and I don't, I try to knock on wood because I don't know if it even matters. I look at my children as like what's most important to me in life, degrees that I have hanging on the wall and stuff like this piece of paper. I mean, I really strongly believe the greatest legacy especially parents being Father's Day coming up, is our children and their well-being and happiness. It's not all about achievement of some sort of thing that we've defined as, hey, this is a really important thing. You did this. That's great.
Right.
It's relationships and having a, sort of, my son Brandon just graduated West Point. So there is a pride in his achievement.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
That's
that I
great.
would put that, so sort of that is is sort of my greatest pride. And then with the book, my hope with the book is that it might give some, positively impact somebody in some way.
Right.
And some people have given me some feedback that they appreciated because I showed vulnerability in a way that allowed them to feel like, they're not alone.
Mhm.
Everyone struggles.
Yeah.
Everyone has challenges, experiences trauma, and that's kind of one of the messages I'd put out there is, it's okay to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Better to be vulnerable and bend than give up.
That's right. So, to the young people that might be listening, we have a demographic that's kind of shifting younger as we're getting more listeners and building up on YouTube, especially where we have some younger listeners. To those young Americans, maybe they're skeptical of traditional institutions like the church, military, government, that kind of stuff. There are areas that you have firsthand experience in. So what would you tell a young person who's questioning whether these systems still work and have value for their futures?
Well, the military is, I think, a great institution. Whether or not it's for everybody is,
Hmm.
I certainly don't think it is. I mean, it's for there's a certain. For me, it was about going into and it's an adventure. So
Right.
I would say for the military, it offers a great pathway, I think, to experience the world. You can get to go deployed get sent to Europe, or there's a lot of places you can go that you wouldn't otherwise. It opens up
Right.
doors, I would say.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody. I mean, the whole experience is it's built on this idea that you might have to go to war,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think, but what really attracts me to it, and what I think might be appealing to younger people, is that there's a bond and relationship and community that you will not get anywhere else in this world. And it's not just now; it connects you through time, in a sense.
Right.
So that's something I have one son who's in the military. The other son, I'm like, yeah, probably not for you, but maybe, maybe you
Right.
change your mind.
Yes. Well, I'm sure a lot of people will say heard and understood, Ryan, in listening to this conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today for the 5 a.m. podcast.
Michael, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a great conversation. And thank you too to our viewers. We appreciate you joining in on this conversation. As I often say, it's like we're having a coffee and something else in the diner. And as you do, you'll eavesdrop on the people behind you. So thank you for listening in. If you haven't already, please help us grow 5 a.m. podcast with a like, a subscribe, and a share, even with 3 of your friends who need to hear this message. One more thing, if you could be so kind as to provide a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player, we would appreciate that. And of course, thanks to those friends of ours who've gone over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast and helped us out with a few of those virtual cups of coffee. Thank you again for all levels of support. We do appreciate it. Until next time, please seize your day, enjoy those sunrises and sunsets, and all of those adventures in between. I'm Michael Clausen. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com.